to JBS. If you're coming here from last week, then you might remember that we had a look at the Promised Kingdom right after the fall, where it looked like nobody was God's people. We suddenly got introduced to this character Abraham, who later became Abraham, and his descendants, who went on to become a nation of people who were supposed to be devoted to God and God alone. And so now we come to the partial kingdom. If you might remember, God's people were Abraham and his descendants. The land that God's place was the land of Canaan that he had promised to Abraham and the descendants of him. And God's rule is expressed through this blessing that he was going to give not just to Israel, but through Israel to the rest of the nations. And it's looking pretty good. It's looking really good. At the moment they are in the land of Canaan. It is no longer the land of Canaan. It is now Israel. Right? God has said, the people who were in this land, just like Adam and Eve, they have rejected me, and so I have rejected them. And just like I expelled Adam and Eve from the garden because of their rejection, I'm going to expel them from the land of Canaan, and I'm going to give that over to the Israelites instead. And so the Israelites come in and they follow God, and they send God out. They send the nations out as an act of judgment from God. And then they set themselves up. And all 12 tribes of Israel get different portions of the land. And then things kind of tend to go a little bit downhill a little bit, because they ask to be like the kingdoms around them. And the difference between them and the other different kingdoms, the different nations around them, is that they have kings. And so they say, we want a king as well. And God says, I am your king. What are you talking about? And the people say, no, we want a king like everybody else. And God says, all right, fine. I will choose a king from among you. And he chooses a man named Saul. And now he says that the role of the king is that he is supposed to enforce the law that God has given to the people, to tell them how they relate to himself. The king is supposed to enforce that. Instead, Saul does a really bad job. He actually worships other gods. He marries foreign women, multiple of them, and he doesn't do a great thing. So he goes pretty bad. But then we get a man by the name of David. And now David, he looks like a great king. He is called a man after God's own heart. He is faithful. He makes a bit of mistakes, but he always says sorry to God for what he has done, and comes back to God for forgiveness. And then his son Solomon comes, and it looks like things get even better. This is kind of what's referred to as the golden age of Israel. And it's fantastic. In this age, silver is as common as stones. They bring in 23 metric tons of gold every year. That's a lot of gold. They have 1,400 chariots and 12,000 Egyptian horses. Solomon has even made a temple dedicated to God. So now people can go to Jerusalem, to this temple, in order to be in the presence of God. It looks great. It does. It looks really, really great. But it looks great as a kingdom. It doesn't look great as a kingdom that's supposed to be focused on God. And there is a difference. And if we flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 17, and if you want to compare that to 1 Kings chapter 2, this is what you'll see. If you want to just actually pause the video, have a read through that, 1 Kings chapter 10 and Deuteronomy 17, just the second half. And then come back and let's go over some of the differences. So, looks pretty bad, right? God says, do not store up silver or gold. They've got a lot of silver and gold. Don't get your horses from Egypt. They've got 12,000 Egyptian horses. You're only allowed one wife. That's what God says. And Solomon gets 700 wives and 300 concubines. And most of which are foreign women, which God says you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to marry other Israelites. And if that were not bad enough, these foreign wives actually lead Solomon away from God and into the worship of other gods. And so it looks alright on the outside, but once we really have a look at what this kingdom is like, it's just as sinful as it was all the way back in the perished kingdom. And we are going to get to a point where God says enough is enough. At the moment, God's people are the Israelites, still the descendants of Abraham. He's still keeping that covenant promise. His place is in the land of Canaan, in Israel, but more specifically, it is in the temple within Jerusalem. That is where you go to be in the presence of God. That is where He dwells with His people. And God's rule is expressed through the law, which is supposed to be enforced by the king. And so, next week, we're going to have a look at the prophesied kingdom. And we're going to have a look at what happens when God finally says, enough is enough.